As we welcome in TSN Hockey Insider and one half of the Rain Dregs Hockey Podcast, Mr. Darren Dreger.
The jewel in our crown.
Ooh, yeah, very nice.
You've done some digging here on a couple of Canucks matters. Let's start with Kevin Lankinen. We've got him in our Surrey Mitsubishi poll question. Should the Canucks re-sign Lankinen if it means paying him starters money? He's been sensational, Dregs, and Toronto and the hockey world saw it on Saturday with a shutout. What's your understay? He is eligible for an extension at this point in time, and some would argue if the playoffs started today, their starting goaltender would be Kevin Lankinen. What are you hearing there?
Well, yeah, I mean, from a fan perspective and what we see as media, we can see that, he has been just a terrific ad. Imagine life with the Vancouver Canucks without Kevin Lankinen. It might be a lot darker than what it is right now. One of the best stories around the league, not just in Vancouver. But because of where Lankinen is at in his career, 29 years of age, doesn't have a wealth of experience at the NHL level. What is he, 140-ish games played in the National Hockey League? The opportunity is there for him to knock things down, make some money, earn a contract. He's doing that right now. But there also has to be, I think, a level of patience from his perspective. So I don't know how hard Vancouver is pushing, but I'm sure they've seen enough in what they've seen with him in Vancouver to be intrigued by the possibility, maybe encouraged to at least initiate a discussion with his camp. But again, now go back to Lankinen's position. And, you're looking around the National Hockey League at recent extensions. You had Mackenzie Blackwood, not too far down the path back. You look at Joey Decord. You've got Logan Thompson, who's, available for an extension with the Washington Capitals. So there are some other quasi-comps, and I'm sure the Canucks management would push back at that. Again, just looking at, the experience factor here. But I think Lankinen is solely focused on what he's been doing in Vancouver, and that's stopping the puck. And, from a business perspective, why wouldn't he wait? Unless Vancouver puts something on the table that gets you into that starter stratosphere, whatever that is. Is it a 5-year extension? And if so, what does that money look like? Again, you look at Joey Decord, he was $5 million flat. You look at Mackenzie Blackwood, just over 5.25, 5.26. So has he earned that status? And I don't know that he has, despite the fact that he's been really, really good. But here's the most interesting part of this for me. What about Thatcher Demko? What about his health? What if, things go sideways for him and for the Vancouver Canucks in this second half, and worst case scenario, he's not available, and you're solely leaning on Kevin Lankinen as being your number one guy? Well, does that not change the perspective and the direction of Lankinen as he engages in that negotiation? So, I think if the Vancouver Canucks were eager to get something done, they would put something in place sooner than later. I don't believe that's happened. And I believe the position of Lankinen and his representatives is to just stay the course, just lay in the weeds. Nothing wrong with that. Continuing to play the goal that he has to this point. And if his numbers are status quo or they even improve and things go off the rails a little bit with other goalies within the Vancouver Canucks ownership, well, then that takes a different turn on the negotiating front.
I think it's abundantly clear you can't go into next year just with Thatcher Demko. And all due respect to Artur Shilovs and Tolopilo down on the farm, developing nicely, but they're not ready for prime time on a regular night basis. They need somebody like Lankinen, if not Lankinen, and then you got to find the new guy that you trust, and that's always a big thing. Yeah. Does 4x4 do it? Do you think? Do you think that wows the agents if you go 4x4?
I don't think it wows them, no. But until that's actually positioned, and in fairness, we don't know what's been discussed, between Patrick Allvin and the agents, in this case, Todd Diamond and Mark Gandler. I just get the sense that there's a willingness from the player perspective, just continue to wait. That doesn't mean that, there isn't an openness to dialogue and communication. And if you're Vancouver and you want to push that needle a little bit, that's what you do. You put a number and a term on the table that's going to make him think a little bit. Because again, now you got to look back at Hockey DB and the resume of Kevin Lankinen. And
he's 29. He's not a spring chicken here.
He is not, and he's he's gone through some heavy lifting, I would say, in making his way to the National Hockey League. Has he? I want to think back to where he broke into the league with Chicago, and I think that was 2021. And he played, like 37 games. And the following year, he played like 32 games. So he's never played more than 30-plus games as an NHL goaltender. So you put those kind of numbers down, term and money, and he's got to think about it as a 29-year-old, to your point. But it's his agent's job to say, okay, well, I can appreciate why, you wouldn't want to push entirely away from something like that. But here are the latest comps that we think you can lean on, depending on what your status is with the Vancouver Canucks in the next several weeks and months.
Decord was 5 by 5.
Yeah.
Demko is on 5 right now.
Like
I wonder if that is a sweeter spot. And then you just
give him Demko money, really?
You bite Demko signed a number of years ago. I mean, the price has gone up, the cap has gone up. It's $5 million, and then you swallow and agree to $10 million on goalies next year, knowing that you're going to be cheaper than that.
Away from the dollars,
going
Dregs,
forward.
Do you think that if the playoffs started today, and depending on points or points percentage, the Canucks might not be in it, but let's say they're in the playoffs, they start today. Do you think the Canucks have the gumption to start the guy who's in much better form in Kevin Lankinen? Or do they have to, for the purposes of the relationship, start Thatcher Demko?
You're saying that with a healthy Thatcher Demko.
Well, like the guy that it is now. Whatever you call this now. Yeah.
If again, it's hypothetical. And to answer your question, if the playoffs started today, I'd go with Thatcher Demko.
Really?
I would, and I just, with all due respect to Kevin Lankinen, the pedigree is higher right now. The investment is longer, most definitely. And if you're not starting Thatcher Demko in Game 1 of the playoffs today, then you better start having conversations potentially in the offseason of what a change in goal looks like, because that's a pretty big shot.
Messy.
Put it this way, gents, to tie up this conversation, I think you'd feel a lot more secure starting Kevin Lankinen in Game 1 if you had Kevin Lankinen signed to an extension.
Oh, exactly.
By Game 1, right? If he's not on an extension and you go Lankinen, wow. That is most interesting.
Yeah, poison the water and not have any security. That's not a good place to be. No.
Yeah, and the body of the work suggests that Demko will find form again, right? I mean,
you'd hope. Yeah,
he's still viewed as a difference maker in goal.
Philip Hronek and his comeback. What are you hearing there?
Yeah, well, we know he's been skating. We know that he was assigned to Abbotsford, and he was participating in a contact practice. So that bodes well for his imminent return to the Vancouver Canucks blue line. Boy, we've talked a lot about trade speculation around the Vancouver Canucks and all of that, and how desperately the Vancouver Canucks need to do something on that blue line. Getting this guy back, it's going to feel like a major trade, isn't it? It just is, because of just how much they've missed him in his absence. Don't have a direct timeline other than sooner rather than later. So you guys have a schedule in front of you. Where does it make the most sense? I think, again, even though he practiced with Abbotsford in contact drills, etc., he's got to do that at the NHL level. So when you see a practice, maybe 2 practices, and talking and company, and the medical people are all on board, and Hronek is like, let's get at it, then you'll see him back in the lineup. But he's much closer than he was.
They won't practice till Friday, you would guess, because they'll take the day off on Wednesday after the game.
Yeah.
And then you'd guess they practice again on the Sunday or the Monday. So 2 practices sounds kind of reasonable, which would maybe mean Tuesday against the Sabres.
Yeah, that makes a lot of
now.
sense. That makes sense. Yeah.
And I don't think it can be undersold what Hronek dropping into this lineup would mean. Since he has played as a Vancouver Canucks, they have been an upper echelon team when he's in the lineup. We talked all last year that, Tocchet and a bunch of other guys deserve credit for that 109-point season. But who was the biggest difference maker from years gone by? It was Philip Hronek. So, that'll be a major addition. So the Canucks want a center back, have to get a center back, Dregs, if they are moving on from Pettersson or JT Miller. Ryan O'Reilly's name has come up in Nashville, where there's no trade protection, although Barry Trotz is going to do well, apparently, by a soon-to-be 34-year-old and try and get him to a place that he would like to play. What do you know about O'Reilly?
Well, just what we continue to talk about in a very speculative fashion. And, last week he was loosely connected to a return to the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I feel like O'Reilly's name is just kind of making the rounds. And, when you think of heavier players and guys who play the game the right way, that's why his name pops up with certain teams. And I could visualize Ryan O'Reilly being a good fit for Rick Tocchet, right? I mean, again, he plays that game. He plays the way Craig Berube wants him to play, needs him to play, needed him to play back in the days of St. Louis. And who's kidding? Who Berube and Rick Tocchet are cut from the same cloth here. They like their heavier players. Look, Ryan O'Reilly still has plenty of game left, but he's also had his share of struggles. And this year, part of the problem wants to be part of the solution. He's not the player that he once was. He's slower, of course, as he gets older. That's just father time taking hold. And I think you're bang on in that, Barry Trotz isn't trying to rid himself of character or quality players. So, hey, if Vancouver wants to step up and, make a proposition that Barry Trotz just can't turn away from, then sure, I suppose it's possible. But are we automatically connecting to Elias Pettersson or JT Miller? Again, the caveat here is, of course, JT Miller, has the full no move clause. And, if something like that were to transpire, it does feel like it's more likely in the offseason where Trotz has full access to what he might get back in return for Ryan O'Reilly. But again, we're still early enough in that second half. Somebody steps up and makes it worth him listening, then he'll have to do that. But I think O'Reilly's name is just on a list of potentially available centers that garners our attention.
And it is a big list of available centers. If you look at the TSN trade bait board that dropped last week, wow, there is just a ton of guys who play, middle ice there. Typically a scarce position, a difficult position to fill, but looks like there's quite a few samplings there on the trade bait board.
Pred's a non-playoff team too, so again with that no move clause,
no,
there is no move clause. He doesn't have one, but Trotz is going to.
No, for Miller though.
Oh, for Miller,
just getting to choose where he wants to go to some degree, right?
Right.
Keep seeing Boston come up for Miller as well, and personality-wise, totally get it. It's sort of an easy dot to connect. But God, you look at the Boston Bruins roster, and I'm not even trying to be a greedy Canuck perspective person here. I just don't see a talent match as to how that would who are the Vancouver Canucks?
You're not taking Lindholm back, right?
Who are the Canucks going to say yes to coming the other way? I just don't see that.
I don't either, man. And therein lies the challenge, right? Again, across the board, we can speculate and we can conjure up the fit and why it makes sense from Boston's perspective, of course. But even when you look at the younger pieces, you've got some contract situations in Boston that are developing. Trent Frederick is an interesting player. I think he's 26. He's a pending unrestricted free agent. Justin Brazeau, a big body, having a good year. Again, contractually, there hasn't been much in the way of back and forth between the Bruins and his camp. So those are pieces that automatically we're drawn to. You look at the Providence Bruins or what they have organizationally, it's pretty thin. It is. I look at Matthew Poitras, who I think is going to be an excellent NHL player. His name would be circled if I'm looking at moving out a piece like JT Miller, assuming Miller is willing to go to Boston. But it feels to me like the Bruins organizationally are right at that crossroads, and maybe at a crossroads that they should have been a year or two ago, right? They were playing with house money through a good chunk of last season, terrifically coached by Jim Montgomery. But didn't we all feel like it was just, they were overachieving? And then they hit the playoffs and kaboom, it all comes crashing to the ground. And now they've been scrambling basically all season long. And there's all kinds of things that are being injected into, what's bugging the Bruins? Is it Marchand and Pasternak? They don't get along now all of a sudden. it's wildness there. So, It feels like if Don Sweeney is going to be the architect of the turnaround, this might be more than a retool. This might be a full-scale renovation, and I don't see JT Miller wanting any part of that.
Everybody with a center designation beside their name is having a wildly underperforming season. Like everybody.
Yeah.
Lindholm, Coyle, Zaka, and even Frederick that you mentioned, who's a nice younger player, but he's still having a way down year compared to last year. It's unbelievable.
We were hoping for a minute there, Dregs, that Pasternak and Marchand would steal the soap opera spot. Smart.
But hey, what do you make of the difference in how the two teams handled it? Like, why did I believe the Bruins protestation that there is nothing there, and I didn't believe the Canucks one? I believed.
You believed Brad Marchand?
I did.
Oh, okay.
The two of them came out, and I believed it.
Yeah,
I did.
I do too. Because look, again, you can't look at 40 games and say, okay, well, these guys clearly have a rift. And whoever the sources were, okay, I understand that. But it's also the reason why I'm always normally very reluctant to dive into a room unless you've got the principals speaking on it, right? And that's what made it different about Vancouver. You know, as soon as the coach started talking about it and the captain started talking about it, and then you had Miller and you had Pettersson come out, okay, well, now we can engage a little bit, because we're dealing from a position of multiple voices, either dismissing or kind of fanning the flames even a little bit. The hint of that. That was going on with the Canucks. I think, honestly, in fairness, it is all settled down for the most part in Vancouver. That's the message in the sense that I'm getting. And maybe Rick Tocchet and the coaching staff use the outside noise as a motivation. Hey, the only way this is going to go away is if we start playing better and we start playing consistently, and that's to a man. That's not pockets. That's not one or two guys. That's everybody. And that game that they played against Toronto on Saturday, that looked pretty good. That looked to me as engaged as Elias Pettersson has been in a long time. What caught my eye, frankly, was his positioning and how well he played in the defensive zone and his willingness to do things physically. If he can duplicate that game after game after game, then all this is going to fade. And I believe Brad Marchand. I do. Look, you don't always have to get along, but look at how well those two men have produced in a Boston uniform, historically speaking. You know, okay, so if you don't go for dinner, I think he oversold and say, we're best friends. We do this, we do that. All right, that might be a little bit of an exaggeration over the top, but based on how hard he swung back, including his post on Instagram, man, he was not going to let the media by and large continue to foster this, and maybe that's what was a bit different in Vancouver.
See, I sort of saw it as he towed the "doth protest too much" line.
Yeah,
but nevertheless, okay, maybe I'm just wishing things to happen there. Lastly, Dregs down the I-5. Seattle gets annihilated by Detroit. It's not a ton of rentals there, although Yanni Gourde and Brandon Tanev look like interesting deadline pieces. Is there a bigger question there with Ron Francis now?
Yeah, I mean, that's where people want to take it, is to the general manager, and I think that's misplaced. I think that roster is okay. And in fact, when they were going, they looked pretty good. So what's gone on here? Why in the last stretch of games have they looked so disconnected as a group? And I don't have the answers to that. I'm sure from a coaching standpoint, Bilesma and company are looking at this roster, and they're like, geez, we could sure use an upgrade here. We could sure use an upgrade over there. But, I mean, doesn't every coach in the National Hockey League likely go through that through varying stages of the regular season? There are a lot of cooks in the kitchen in Seattle.
Yeah, second year in a row, I've looked at it too and went, that roster is better than what the performance is. I know Grubauer has been.
When you say a lot of cooks, you mean there's too many decision makers and they can't decide on one thing? Is that it?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, I wouldn't show that level of disrespect to Ronnie Francis, but I think that he deals with a lot. And I think, look, and I also get it from a senior management and an ownership perspective in Seattle as well. This is a team that is in a strong hockey market. Right? They want to be playoff relevant. They want to take the next step and all of that. I mean, from a marketing and an ownership perspective, that's part of your job. You put bums in the seats, and let's get that rivalry going with the Canucks, and let's show that, from a Pacific perspective, we are a high-quality organization. And at times, I think toes have been stepped on from a hockey ops perspective. So there's a lot going on there that we may never find out about, because one thing I know of Ron Francis, he'll dive on the sword. He'll go down swinging, and you'll never get the truth out of him as to whether or not he was, being manipulated or people were going over his head or any of that stuff. But if it were as easy as Ron Francis bringing in players, he would have done that by now. I think that there's a lot of different factors in this.
Interesting. Great stuff, Dregs. Have an awesome week. We'll catch up next Monday.
All right, guys. Thanks again.